Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 7, Monuments Raised to Fire Worship in All Countries, from The Philosophy of Fire by Swinburne Clymer. Godhood. Philosophy brings life. She is beautiful. She carries a cup in her hand. It is of gold. She begs you to drink and live. She is your handmaiden. Philosophy. The cup is pure metal. The drink is elixir, life. As man you are mortal. You have stood in the sunshine so long you are blind. As man you are drunk with a drop of pure life. You have listened so long to the seas that you are deaf. Philosophy brings you the cup and you drink and you open your eyes. She waits and you listen and hear. You burn with desire and you thrill. Then dip in the blood of yourself and write on the parchment a scroll and read in the letters the words. In the words the command, in the command the design, in the design the beginning and the end. Living you read and reading you live, ceasing to be mortal but soar as a god. If ever the bush is on fire, hearken for the voice and hear. Something is speaking, listen and listen. Something is shining, the bush is on fire. Divine alchemy. Monuments raised to fire worship in all countries. In the succeeding pages, we believe we will be able to show, beyond successful contradiction, an extraordinary discovery. It is that the whole round of disputed emblems which so puzzle antiquaries, and which are found in all countries, point to the belief in fire as the first principle. We seek to show that fire worship was the very earliest from the immemorial times, that it was the foundation religion, that the attestation to it is preserved in monuments scattered all over the globe, that the rites and usages of all creeds, down even to our own day, and in everyday use about us, bear reference to it, that problems and puzzles in religion, which cannot be otherwise explained, stand clear and evident when regarded in this new light, that in all the Christian varieties of belief, as truly as in Buddhism, in Mohammedanism, in heathenism of all kinds, whether Eastern or Western or Northern or Southern, this mystery of fire stands ever general, recurring, and conspicuous, and that in being so, beyond all measure old, and so beyond all modern, or any idea of it general, as nearly universal in fact as man himself, and the thoughts of man, and as being that beyond which, in science and in natural philosophy, we cannot farther go, it must carry truth with it, however difficult to comprehend, and however unsuspected, that is, as really being the manifestation and spirit of God, and to the confounding and annihilation of atheism, revelation. Affirmatively, we shall now therefore offer to the attention of the reader the universal scattering of the fire monuments, taking up at the outset certain positions about them. Narrowly considered, it will be found that all religions transcend up into this spiritual fire floor on which, to speak metaphysically, the phases of time were laid. Material fire, which is the brighter as the matter of which it is constituted is blacker, is the shadow, so to express or to speak, necessarily with words which have no meaning in the spirit, of the spirit light, which invests itself in it as the mask in which alone it can be possible. Thus, material light being the very opposite of God, the Egyptians, who were undoubtedly acquainted with the fire revelation, could not represent God as light. They therefore expressed their idea of deity by darkness. Their chief adoration was paid to darkness. They bodied the eternal forth under darkness. Stones were set up by the patriarchs, the Bible records them. In India, the first objects of worship were monoliths. In the two peninsulas of India, in Ceylon, in Persia, in the Holy Land, in Phoenicia, in Saramathia, in Scythia, everywhere where worship was attempted, and in what place where man exists, is it not? Everywhere where worship was practiced, and where out of fear did not first come the gods and then their propitiation, in all the countries we repeat, as the earliest of man's work, we recognize this sublime, mysteriously speaking, ever-recurring monolith, marking up the tradition of the supernaturally real and only real fire dogma. Buried so far down in time, the suspicion assents that there must somehow be truth in the foundation. Not fanciful, legendary, and philosophical creed truth, inexplainable and only to be admitted without question, truth. But truth, however mysterious and awing, yet cogent, and not to be of philosophy, that is illumination, denied. The death and descent of Balder into the hell of the Scandinavians may be supposed to be the purgatory of the human unit, or the God illuminate, from the light through the God-dark phases of being, back into its native light. Balder was the Scandinavian sun god, and the same as the Egyptian Osiris, the Greek Hercules, Bacchus and Phoebus, or Apollo, the Indian Krishna, the Persian Mithras, the Aten of the empires of insular Asia, or even of the Sidonians, the Athir or Ashtaroth. The presence of all these divinities, indeed of all gods, were of the semblance of fire, and we recognize, as it were, the mark of the foot of them, or of the impersonated fire, in the countless uprights left as memorials, in the great ebb of the ages as waves, to nations in the later divisions of that great roll of periods called time, yet to totally unguessing of the preternatural mystery, seeming the key of all belief, and the reading of all wonders which they speak. It is to be noted that all the above religions, all the creeds of fire, were exceedingly similar in their nature, that they all were fortified by rites and fenced around with ceremonies, and associated as they were with mysteries and initiations, the disciple was led through the knowledge of them in stages. As his powers augmented and his eyes saw, until towards the last grades, as if he himself grew capable and illuminate, the door was closed upon all after-pressing and unrecognized inquirers, and the admitted one was himself lost sight of. There was a great wave to the westward of all knowledge, all cultivation of the arts, all tradition, all intellect, all civilization, all religious belief. The world was peopled westward. There seems some secret divine impress upon the world's destinies, and indeed ingrained in cosmical matter in these matters. All faiths seem to have diverged out, the narrower or the wider, as rays from the great central sun of this tradition of the fire original. It would seem that Noah, who is suspected to be the Fo or Fohi of the Chinese, carried it into the farthest Cathay of the Middle Ages. What is the Chinese Tian, or earliest fire? The pagodas of the Chinese, which name pagoda was borrowed from the Indian. From which country of India indeed probably came into China its worship, and its Buddhist doctrine of the exhaustion back into the divine light, or unparticled nothingness of all the stages of being or of evil. The Chinese pagodas, we repeat, are nothing but innumerable gilt and belled fanciful repetitions of the primeval monolith. The fire, or light, is still worshipped in the Chinese temples. It has not been perceived that, in the very form of the Chinese pagodas, the fundamental article of the Chinese religion, transmigration through stages of being out into nothingness of this world, has been architecturally emblemed in the diminishing stories, carried upwards and finding a way into the series of unaccountable discs struck through a vertical rod, until all culminates and, as it were to speak heraldically of it, the last achievement is blazoned in the gilded ball, which means the final or Buddhist glorifying absorption. Buildings have always telegraphed the insignia of the mythologies, and in China the fantastic speaks the sublime. We recognize the same embodied mythos in all architectural spiring or artistic diminution, whether tapering to the globe or exaltation of the Egyptian uraeus, or the disk, or the Sidonian crescent, or the lunar horns, or the acroterium of the Greek temple, or the pediment of the classic Pronaios itself, crowning how grandly and suggestively at solemn dawn, or in the spirit lustres of the dimming and still more than dawn, solemn twilight, the top of some mountain and ancient of the days. Here, besetting us at every turn, meet we the same mystic emblem, again, in the crescent of the Mohammedan fanes, surmounting even the Latin, and therefore the once Christian Saint Sophia. Last and not least, the countless churches rise in the latter-day dispensation sublimely to the universal signal in the glorifying or top or crowning cross. Last of the revelation, in the fire towers of the Sikhs, in the dome-covered and many-storied spires of the Hindus, in the vertically turreted and longitudinally massed temples of the Buddhas, of all the classes and of all the sects in the religious building of the Sinhalese, in the upright flame fanes of the Parsas, in the original of the campaniles of the Italians, in the Tower of St. Mark at Venice, the flame-shaped or pyramidal, pier is the Greek for fire, architecture of the Egyptians, which is the parent of all that is called architecture, we see the recurring symbol. All the minarets that in the eastern sunshine glisten through the land of the Moslem. Indeed, his two-horned crescent, equally with the moon or disk or two-pointed globe of the Sidonian Ashtaroth, after whose forbidden worship Solomon, the wisest of mankind, in his defection from the God of his fathers, evilly thirsted. Also the mystic discus or round of the Egyptians, so continually repeated and set as it were as the forehead mark upon all the temples of the land of soothsayers and sorcerers, this Egypt so profound in its philosophies, in its wisdom, in its magic seeing, and in its religion, raising out of the black abyss a god to shadow it, all the minarets of the Mohammedan, we say, together with all the other symbols of moon or disc or wings or of horns, equally with the shadowy and preternatural beings in all mythologies and in all theologies, to which these adjuncts or insignia are referred and which are symbolized by them. All these monuments or bodied meanings testify to the deification of fire. What may mean that Tower of Babel and its impious raising, when it sought even past and over the clouds to imply a daring sign? What portent was that betrayal of a knowledge not for man? That surmise forbidden save in infinite humility, and in the whispered impartment of the further and seemingly more impossible and still more greatly mystical meanings. In utter abnegation of self alone shall the mystery of fire be conceived. Of what was this tower Belus, or the fire, to be the monument? When it soared as a pharos on the rock of the traditionary ages to defy time in its commitment to form of the unpronounceable secret, stage on stage and story on story, though it climbed the clouds and on its top should shine the ever-burning fire, first idol in the world, dark save with neglected stars, what was the Tower of Babel but a gigantic monolith? Perhaps to record and to perpetuate this ground fire of all, to be worshipped in idol in its visible form, when it should be alone taken as the invisible thoughts fire to be waited for, spirit possession, not waited on, idolatry? Therefore was the speech confounded, that the thing should not be. Therefore, under the myth of climbing into heaven by the means of it, was the first colossal monolithic temple, in which the early dwellers upon the earth sought to enshrine the fire, laid prostrate in the thunder of the great God. And the languages were confounded from that day. Speech was made Babel, thence its name, that the secret should remain a secret. It was to be only darkly hinted, and to be fitfully disclosed, like a false showing light in the theosophic glimmer amidst the world's knowledge lights. It was to reappear like a spirit to the initiate, in the glimpse of reverie, in the snatches of sight, in the profoundest wisdom, through the studies of all ages. We find in the religious administration of the ancient world the most abundant proofs of the secret fire tradition. Schweiger shows, in his Introduction into Mythology, pages 132 and 228, that the Phoenician Kabiri and the Greek Dioskuir, the Curetes, Corybantes, Telkini, were originally of the same nature and are only different in trifling particulars. All these symbols represent electric and magnetic phenomena, and that under the ancient name of twin fires, hermaphrodite fire. The Dioscuri is a phrase equivalent to the sons of heaven, if, as Herodotus asserts, Zeus originally represented the whole circle of heaven. From India into Egypt was imported this spiritual fire belief. We recognize again its never-failing structure signal. Rightly regarded, the Great Pyramids are nothing but the world-enduring architectural attestation following in the pyramidal, the well-known leading law of Egypt's Templar piling mound-like spire of the universal flame faith. Place a light upon the summit, star-like upon the sky, and a prodigious altar the mighty pyramid then becomes. In this tribute to the world-filling faith, Burneth expressed devotion to, radiateth acknowledgement of the immortal magic religion. There is little doubt that as token and emblem of fire worship, as indicative of the adoration of the real accepted deity, these pyramids were raised. The idea that they were burial places of the Egyptian monarchs is untenable when submitted to the weighing of meanings, and when it comes side by side with this better fire explanation. Cannot we accept these pyramids as the vast altars on whose top should burn the flame, commemorative as it were to all the world? Cannot we see in these piles, literally and really transcendental in original, the Egyptian reproduction and a hieroglyphical signaling on of special truth eldest of time? Do we not recognize in the pyramid the repetition of the first monolith, all the uprights constituting the grand attesting pillar to the supernatural traditions to a fire-born world? the ever-recurring globe with wings, symbol of the soul so frequent in the sculptures of the Egyptians, witness to the electric principle. It embodies the transmigration of the Indians reproduced by Pythagoras. Pythagoras resided for a long period in Egypt and acquired from the priests the philosophic transition, knowledge which was afterwards doctrine. The globe, disc or circle, of the Phoenician Astarte, the crescent of Minerva, the horns of the Egyptian Amnion, the deifying of the ox, all have the same meaning. We trace among the Hebrews the token of the identical mystery in the horns of Moses, distinct in the sublime statue by Michelangelo in the Vatican, as also in the horns of the Levitical altar, indeed the use of the double hieroglyph in continental ways. The volutes of the Ionic column, the twin stars of Castor and Pollux, nay, generally the employment of the double emblem all the world over, in ancient or in modern times, whether displayed as points or radii or wings, on the helmets of those barbarian chiefs who made war upon Rome, Attila or Genseric, or broadly shown upon the headpiece of the Frankish Clovis, whether emblemed in the rude and, as it were, savagely mystic horns of the Asiatic idols, or reproduced in the horns of the runic hammerer or destroyer, or those of the Gothic Mars, or of the modern devil, all this double spreading from a common point, or this figure of horns, speaks the same story. The Colossus of Rhodes was a monolith in the human form dedicated to the sun or the fire. The Pharaohs of Alexandria was a fire monument. Heliopolis, or the City of the Sun, in Lower Egypt, as the name signifies, contained a temple, wherein, combined with all the dark superstitions of the Egyptians, the flame secret was preserved. In most jealous secrecy was the tradition guarded, and the symbol alone was presented to the world, of the pyramids as prodigious fire monuments, we have before spoken. Magnificent as the principal pyramid still is, it is stated by an ancient historian that it originally formed, at the base, a square of 800 feet, and that it was 800 feet high. Another informs that 366,000 men were employed 20 years in its erection. Its height is now supposed to be 600 feet. Have historians and antiquaries carefully weighed the fact, even in the name of the pyramids, that pyr or pur in the Greek means fire? We would argue that that object in the Great Pyramid, which has been mistaken for a tomb and which is moreover rather fashioned like an altar, smooth and plain without any carved work, is in reality the vase, urn or depository of the sacred ever-burning fires of the existence, which ever-living inextinguishable fire to be found at some period of the world's history, there is abundant tradition. This view is fortified by the statements of Diodorus, who writes that Cheops or Chemis, who founded the principal pyramid, and Chephren or Chepherinus, who built the next to it, were neither buried here, but that they were deposited elsewhere. It is evident from their hieroglyphics that the Egyptians were acquainted with the wonders of magnetism. By means of it, and by the secret power which lie in the hypersensual heaped floors of it, out of the everyday senses the Egyptians struck together, as it were, a bridge, across which they paraded into the supernatural, the magic portals receiving them as on the other and armed side of a drawbridge, shaking in its raising, or in its lowering, as out of flesh. Athwart this, in trances swept the adepts, leaving their mortality behind them, all and their earth surroundings to be resumed at their reissue upon the plains of life, when down in their humanity again. In the cities of the ancient world, the palladium or protesting talisman, invariably set up in the chief square of place, was, there is but little doubt, the reiteration of the very earliest monolith. All the obelisks, each often a single stone of prodigious weight, all the singular, solitary, wonderful pillars and monuments of Egypt, as of other lands, are, as it were, only tombstones of the fire. All testify to the great, so darkly hinted secret. In Troy was the image of Pallas, the myth of knowledge of the world, of manifestation of the fire, soul. In Athens was Pallas Athene or Minerva. In the Greek cities, the form of the deity changed variously to Bacchus, to Hercules, to Phoebus Apollo, to the triform Minerva, Dian and Hecate, to the dusky Ceres or the darker Cybele. In the wilds of Sarmathia, in the wastes of northern Asia, the luminous rays descended from heaven, and animating the Lama or Lightborn, spoke the same story. The flames of the Greeks, the towers of the Phoenicians, the emblems of the Pelasgi, the story of Prometheus, and the myth of his stealing the fire from heaven, wherewith to animate the man or ensoul the visible world, the forges of the Cyclops and the monuments of Sicily, the mysteries of the Etrurians, the rites of the Carthaginians, the torches borne in all priestly demonstrative processions at all times in all countries, the vestal fires of the Romans, the very word flamen, as indicative of the office of the officiating sacerdote, the hidden fire of the ancient Persians, and the grimmer, at least in name, guebres, the whole mystic meaning of flames on altars, of the ever-burning tomb lights of the earlier peoples, whether in the classic or in the barbarian lands. Everything of this kind was intended to signify the deified fire. Fires are lighted in the funeral ceremonies of the Hindus and of the Mohammedans, even to this day, though the body be committed whole to earth. Wherefore fire, then, cremation and urn burial, or the burning of the dead, practiced in all ages, imply a profounder meaning than is generally supposed. They point to the transmigration of Pythagoras, or to the purgatorial reproductions of the Indians, among whom we the earliest find the dogma. The real signification of fire burial is the commitment of human mortality into the last of all matter, overleaping the intermediate state, or the delivering over of the man unit into the flame soul, past all intervening spheres or stages of the purgatorial, the absolute doctrine of the Buddhas, taught even at this day among the initiates all over the East. Thus we see how classic practice and heathen teaching may be made to reconcile, how even the Gentile and the Hebrew, the mytho, logical and the so-called Christian doctrine harmonize in the general faith, founded in magic, that magic is indeed possible, is the moral of our work. We find therefore in the earliest ages an ether, spiritual fire theory, by which many modern theorists endeavor to explain the phenomena of magnetism. This is the Aethereum, one of the fundamental doctrines of the Eth priesthood, and the development of the ether or eth fire is part of the training. Fire indeed would appear to have been the chosen element of God. In the form of a flaming bush, he appeared to Moses on Mount Sinai. His presence was denoted by torrents of flame, and in the form of fire he preceded the band of Israelites by night through the dreary wilderness, which is perhaps the origin of the present custom of the Arabians, who always carry fire in front of their caravans, Reed's veil of Isis. All the early fathers held God the Creator to consist of a subtle fire. When the Holy Spirit descended upon the apostles on the day of Pentecost, it was in the form of a tongue of fire, accompanied by a rushing wind. The personality of Jehovah is in Scripture represented by the material trinity of nature, which also, like the divine antitype, is of one substance. The primal scriptural type of the Father is fire, of the Word, light, and of the Holy Ghost, spirit or air in motion. Holy fires, which were never suffered to die, were maintained in all the temples. Of these were the fires in the temple of the Gaditanian Hercules at Tyre, in the temple of Vesta at Rome, among the Brahmins of India, among the Jews, and principally among the Persians. As soon as Jesus was born, according to the Gnostic speculative view of Christianity, Christos, uniting himself with Sophia, holy wisdom, descended through the 7 planetary regions, assuming in each an analogous form to the region and concealing his true nature from its genii, whilst he attracted into himself the sparks of divine light they severally retained in their angelic essence. Thus Christos, having passed through the 7 angelic regions before the throne, entered into the man Jesus at the moment of his baptism in the Jordan. From that time forth, being supernaturally gifted, Jesus began to work miracles. Before that, he had been completely ignorant of his mission. When on the cross, Christos and Sophia left his body and returned to their own sphere. Upon his death, the two took the man Jesus and abandoned his material body to the earth. For the Gnostics held that the true Jesus did not and could not physically suffer on the cross and die, but that Simon of Cyrene, who bore his cross, did in reality suffer in him room, and they compel one Simon a Cyrenian, who passed by coming out of the country, the father of Alexandria and Rufus, to bear his cross. St. Mark 15:21. At the point of the miraculous transference of persons, Christos and Sophia, the divine, left his body and returned to their own heaven. Upon his death on earth, the two withdrew the being Jesus spiritually, and gave him another body made up of ether, Rosicrucian ethereum. Thenceforward he consisted of the two Rosicrucian principles only, soul and spirit, which was the reason the disciples did not recognize him after the resurrection. During his sojourn upon earth, 18 months after he had risen, he received from Sophia, Suf, or holy wisdom, that perfect knowledge or illumination, that true gnosis, which he communicated to the small number of the apostles who were capable of receiving the same. As the Son of God remained unknown to the world, so must the disciple of Basilides also remain unknown to the rest of mankind. As they know all this and yet must live among strangers, they must conduct themselves towards the rest of the world as invisible and unknown. Hence our motto, learn to know all, but keep thyself unknown. Irenaeus. Though fire is an element in which everything inheres and of which it is the life, still, according to the Rosicrucian idea, it is itself another element, in a second non-terrestrial element, or inner, non-physical, ethereal fire, in which the first coarse fire, so to speak, flickers, waves, brandishes, and spreads, floating, like a liquid, now here, now there. The first is the natural, material, gross fire with which we are familiar, contained in a celestial, unparticled and surrounding medium, or celestial fire, which is its matrix, and of which in this human body we can know nothing. Pitha is the emblem of the eternal spirit from which everything is created. The Egyptians represented it as a pure ethereal fire which burns forever, whose radiance is raised far above the planets and stars. In early ages, the Egyptians worshipped this highest being under the name of Hathor. He was the Lord of the universe. The Greeks transformed Hathor into Venus, who was looked upon by them in the same light as Hathor. According to the Egyptians, says Jablonski, matter has always been connected with the mind. The Egyptian priests also maintained that the gods appeared to man, and that spirits communicated with the human race. The souls of men are, according to the oldest Egyptian doctrine, formed of ether and at death return again to it. The saffron robe of Hymen is of the color of the flame of fire. The bride in ancient days was covered with a veil called the flammeon. Unless made under this, no vow was considered sacred. The ancients swore not by the altar, but by the flame of fire which was upon the altar. Yellow, or flame-colored, was the color of. The Gebers, or Gebras, or fire worshippers. The Persian lilies are yellow, and here will be remarked a connection between this fact of the yellow of the Persian lilies and the mystic symbols in various parts. Mystic rites and the symbolical lights which mean the divinity of fire abound at Candlemas Day, February 2nd, or the Feast of Purification, in the torches borne at weddings and in the typical flame brandishing at marriage over almost all the world, in the illumination at feasts, in the lights on and set about the Christian altar, at the festival of the Holy Nativity, in the ceremonies at preliminary espousals, in the Baal fires on the summits of the mountains, in the watchlights or votive sanctuary lights, in the hermitage in the lowest valley, in the Chapelle Ardente, in the Romish funeral observances with its abundance of silent, touching lights around the splendid catafalque, or twinkling pale and ineffectual singly at the side of the deathbed in the cottage of the peasant. Starry lights and innumerable torches at the stately funeral, or at any pompous celebration, mean the same. In short, light all over the world when applied to religious rites and to ceremonial, whether in the ancient or in the modern times, bespeaks the same origin and struggles to express the same meaning, which is Parsiism, Perseism, or the worship of the deified fire disguised in many theological forms. It will, we trust, never be supposed that we mean in this material fire, but only the inexpressible something of which fire, or rather its flower or glory, bright light, is the farthest off, because in being visible at all, it is the grossest and most inadequate image. The Rosicrucians maintain that all things visible and invisible having been produced by the contention of light with darkness, the earth has denseness in its innumerable heavy concomitants downwards, and they contain less and less of the original divine light as they thicken and solidify the grosser and heavier in matter. They taught nevertheless that every object, however stifled or delayed in its operation, and darkened and thickened in the solid blackness at the base, yet contains a certain possible deposit or jewel of light, which light, although by natural process it may take ages to evolve, as light will tend at last by its own native irresistible force upward, when it has opportunity, can be liberated. That dead matter will yield this spirit in a space more or less expeditious by the art of the alchemist. These are worlds within worlds, we, human organisms, only living in a deceiving or Buddhistic, dreamlike phase of the grand panorama. Unseen and unsuspected because in it lies magic, there is an inner magnetism or divine aura or ethereal spirit or possible eager fire, shut and confined as in a prison in the body or in all sensible objects, which have more or less of spiritually sensitive life, as they can more successfully free themselves from this ponderable material obstruction. Thus, all minerals in this spark of light have the rudimentary possibility of plants and growing organisms. Thus, all plants have rudimentary sensitives, which might, in the ages, enable them to perfect and transmute into locomotive new creatures, lesser or higher in their grade, no nobler or meaner in their functions. Thus, all plants and vegetables might pass off by side roads into more distinguished highways, as it were, of independent, completer advance, allowing their original spark of light to expand and thrill with higher and more vivid force, and to urge forward with more abounding, informed purpose, all wrought by planetary influence directed by the unseen spirits or workers of the great original architect, building his microcosmos of a world from the plans and power evoked in the macrocosm, or heaven of first forms, which in their multitude and magnificence are as changeable shadows cast off from the central immortal first light, whose rays dart from the center to the extremest point of the universal circumference. It is with terrestrial fire that the alchemist breaks or sunders the material darkness or atomic thickness, all visible nature yielding to his furnaces, whose scattering heat without its sparks breaks all doors of this world's kind. It is with immaterial fire or ghostly fire that the Rosicrucian loosens contradiction and error and conquers the false knowledge and the deceiving senses which bind the human soul in its prison. On this side of his powers, on this dark side to the world of his character, the alchemist, rather now become the Rosicrucian, works in visible light and is a Magian. He lays the bridge as the pontifex or bridge maker between the world known and the world unknown, and across this bridge he leads the votary out of his dream of life into his dream of temporary death, or into extinction of the senses and of the powers of the senses. Which world's blindness is the only true and veritable life, the envelope of flesh falling metaphorically off the now liberated fire into rhapsody which is at the gate of heaven. Now a few words as to the theory of alchemy. The alchemist boasted of the powers after their elimination and dispersion of the ultimate elements of bodies by fire, represented by the absent difference of their weights before and after their dissolution, to recover them back out of that exterior unknown world surrounding this world, which world men reason against as if it had no existence when it has real existence. It is this other world, just off this real world, into which the Rosicrucians say they can enter and bring back, as proofs that they have been there, the old things, thought escaped, metamorphosed into new things. This act is transmutation. This product is magic gold or fairy gold, condensed as real gold. This growing gold, or self-generating and multiplying gold, is obtained by invisible transfutation and in other light, in another world out of this world. Immaterial to us creatures of limited faculties, but material enough, farther on the heavenly side or on the side opposite to our human side. In other words, the Rosicrucians claimed not to be bound by the limits of the present world, but to be able to pass into this next world, inaccessible only in appearance, and to be able to work in it and to come back safe out of it, bringing their trophies with them, which were gold obtained out of this master circle or outside elementary circle, different from ordinary life, though enclosing it. And the elixir vitae, or the means of the renewal or the perpetuation of human life through this universal, immortal medicine or magisterium, which being a portion of the light outside, or magic or breath of the spirits fleeing from man, and only to be won in the audacity of alchemical exploration, was independent of those mastered natural elements or nutritions necessary to common life. The Vedas describe the Persian religion, fire worship, as having come from Upper Egypt. The mysteries celebrated within the recesses of the Hypogea, caverns or labyrinths, were precisely of that character which is called Freemasonic or Kabiric, The signification of this latter epithet is as to written letters, a desideratum. Selden has missed it, so have Origen and Sophocles. Strabo too and Montfaucon have been equally astray. Hyde was the only one who had any idea of its composition when he declared that it was a Persian word, somewhat altered from Gabri or Guebri, signifying fire worshippers. Pocock, in his India in Greece, is very sagacious and true in his arguments, but he tells only half the story of the myths in his supposed successful divestment of them of all unexplainable character and of exterior supernatural origin. He supposes that all the mystery must necessarily disappear when he has traced and carefully pointed out the identity and transference of these myths from India into Egypt and into Greece, and their gradual spread westward. But he is wholly wrong, and most other modern explainers are equally mistaken. This is not an attempt to restore superstition to its dispossessed pedestal, but to replace the supernatural upon its abdicated throne. Also to discover what the nature of this fire should be, which seems to have been the thing earliest worshipped in the world, and continued traces of which survive not only over all Europe, but in all other countries. Fire philosophy is the foundation of all religions. It is the philosophy of the soul, of love, and of God. Without fire, there could be no existence. God, love, and the soul are all one and the same thing, the living fire. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.